Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the MindsetGo radio show. It is great to be back here and joining you for another week. And today we're going to talk about the word transition. Transition. But Ted, before I get into the word transition and we do a little word association with our audience rhetorically today,
okay,
I got to share something with you. I watched this past week, there was a special, I believe it was on HBO or Showtime. It was a retrospective on Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown.
Wow, yeah.
And it got me thinking, listening to Marvin Gaye coming out of that last show, the Drew Morgan show today. And I got to tell you, Berry Gordy was an absolute genius.
Oh, yeah, he was a genius. And he was good with people, which is unusual to have a genius that's also good with people.
I love that. He represented so many qualities that we admire in people: perseverance, determination, resiliency, and to watch what he took from absolute scraps to build up to a multi-million-dollar empire. It's incredible.
There were elements there that we could never understand that they were going through.
No way.
Just socially and culturally, they had some real obstacles.
So if you are into music and you're particularly a fan of Motown, I encourage. It's a Hitsville, USA about Motown. It's either on Showtime or documentary. Tremendous special. With that said, let's talk transition. So Ted, let's do some word association. No, don't overthink it. Immediately, what are the words that come to your head when you think of the word transition?
I think of going places. I think of finding new thoughts and new people.
It's interesting, all positives. I like how you went with all positives there.
Yeah, transition has never been an issue for me. Stagnation is an issue for me.
Interesting. Well, I got to tell you, Ted, the reason why I wanted to do the show today is because I'm going through some pretty big transitions in my family right now. My youngest son is starting middle school. My daughter, who recently graduated from college, is moving out of my house this weekend and going on her own for the first time.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking of how many different life and professional transitions we go through. It's countless over the course of our lives.
The only thing for sure is that it will change.
That is true. And so, I was pondering, Ted, before the show. I was thinking, what are some things that I would identify with transition? And I started thinking about things like fresh start, the word change, feeling like change is coming, the unknown, fear, but then going to where you were going with excitement. We're going places, things are happening. And I just thought of the swirl of emotions that go with transition, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. And for those of you out there who either yourself are going through a transition or a family member going through a transition, I want to start today with the transition that we all go through at one point or another, which is the transition from middle school to high school. The transition to high school to either college, the military, a job, whatever, it's still a transition. And then the transition from college to what we call real life. So I want to focus on that in the first half of the show today. And I put together a program, Ted, that I've been doing in area high schools to help students transition from 8th grade to prepare for what they're about to encounter in high school.
Oh, boy.
Now, Ted, here's my question for you. If you had to guess what the top 2 or 3 fears for students going into high school, what do you think they are?
Well, for boys, it would be girls. And for girls, it would be teachers.
Interesting. Well, it's funny. It's neither. Although teachers indirectly is a transition. Here's what they're worried about. They're worried about overwhelm. Increased workload, increased expectations, lots of pressure on grades. They're worried about being accepted and fitting in.
Right, not enough time to think about girls. Yeah, I get it.
Ted, this is not supposed to be about you and me now. We're...
I'm sorry. It's just, I clearly remember that feeling. And I think you hit on it earlier. It's about fear. It's about desperation to fit in. And that's why I started with the girls. The boys, thinking about the girls and the girls thinking about the teachers. Because kids at that age not only want to be acceptable, but they want to be accepted.
Yeah, well, and what's interesting about it is when the kids start listing their fears going into high school, what they're worried about, and then I do these follow-up workshops with the parents. And I say, what are your biggest fears for your kids? Right? What do you think those are?
Learning how to spend money, learning how not to spend money, finding the impetus to manage their time on their own so that you're not in their face. Because I think a lot of parents every parent wants to be a helicopter parent, but most parents learn that that's not a positive thing. So they're looking for the opportunity to stand back and watch, but they want triggers to jump in too.
Yeah, and I think what I'm finding is that the parents' biggest fears are the decision-making abilities of their kids. You know, will they make the right decisions? It's giving up the control. Not that parents articulate it that my biggest fear is giving up the control, but it is really balancing that fine line right between independence and still support, right?
Yeah, I had a teacher once tell me that children at that age, 11, 12, 13, you have to wean them intellectually the way you wean a baby physically.
I think that's great advice or feedback. And then it's the grades, right, Ted? Then it's the grades. And when I ask parents, how many of you, and picture this, Ted, picture a room full of parents. Okay, and if you're listening to this show, you know if this is you, all right? Where I say, what are your expectations about grades for your kids? But this is the part. I say, have you actually shared your expectations and not only shared them, but actually taken the time to see if your kids' values around grades are aligned with your values around grades?
Yeah, it's a great life lesson, that opportunity with a child to teach them how to set the terms, define the terms of your arrangement with the rest of the world. In this case, junior high school. Oh, we don't call it that now. It's middle school. Sorry.
Yeah, right. Well, and Ted, you know what I find interesting? It doesn't matter whether it's in the workplace, whether it's a parent to a child, a coach to an athlete. It doesn't matter. You know, probably one of the biggest offenders of good communication is ambiguity. And so that crater of this is what I expect of you, this is what I think you expect of me, and are we aligned? That ambiguity in communication haunts people all the time.
Sure.
So I asked these parents, I said, what would happen if your kids are walking around all through high school with this template in their mind that if they don't get straight A's or if they don't get all A's and B's, they're a failure. They're letting you down, they're letting their teachers down, they're letting themselves down. And so their takeaway all through high school, stress, mental health, emotional health, is they're carrying around that huge weight. How would you feel if that happened? And they're like, well, I wouldn't want that.
No, I wouldn't want that, no.
And I say, well, what are you doing about it? You know, what are you as a parent doing to talk about specifically what your expectations are, asking your children what their own expectations are of themselves, and then having a discussion with where do they meet? And I'll tell you something else, Ted. I love when kids tell me, and I'll say, well, so what are your own goals? What are your own goals? They'll say, well, I want to get all A's and B's. And I say, well, okay, fair enough. If you don't get all A's and B's and you get one C, then what happens? And they're like, yeah, well, it wouldn't be great, but it'd be okay.
I took a lot of heat from some educators because of what I did with my 3 children. I literally gave them cash rewards based on the numerical grades. So they wanted A's because they got a lot more money for an A than they did for a B or a C.
Okay, so Ted, let's talk about that. That's a perfect transition because one of the things I mention when I do parenting workshops, and even leaders I'll say is, are you reliant on extrinsic motivators and consequences as your only way to motivate people? So were you reliant on that only that way?
Oh, no. I used it as a means by which to inquire. So how much should I plan to pay you when we get to, what's going to happen? I want to be able to carve out your share. And with the older, the older they got, the quicker they caught on to what I was doing.
So first of all, if I had to guess a million directions you were going with there, I would never have guessed that. That was beautiful. I loved it. But Ted, what about the argument for parents who will say, well, they're supposed to get good grades anyway. They're supposed to want to work, and you're setting them up in the future where they're not going to get paid for everything, so you're setting a bad model. What do you say to that?
That's BS, because we get paid for performance no matter what we do.
But what about the but wait.
I'm sorry.
Hold on. But what about in the workplace? You have tons of responsibilities that you don't like.
Yeah.
And so you're not necessarily paid to do all those things.
Right.
It's cumulatively. So what about the fact that it doesn't really motivate you to do the things that you don't really love to do?
Well, wait a minute. I had one child that loved to read books and wanted nothing to do with math. And I had another child who didn't want to spend any more time reading a book and wanted to understand calculations and how to judge the world around her. So, every kid's different, and that's one of the reasons why I used the cash remuneration for letter grades, was because that was a level playing field that they could all play on. And I instilled competition in my home. And like I said, I took a lot of heat for that.
Would you do it again?
Absolutely do it again.
Interesting. So look, for the parents listening to the show, when we come back after the first break, we're going to talk more about how to motivate your kids, and we're also going to talk about different ways to cope with these life transitions that your kids are going through right now. With that said, I'm your host, Mark Altman. This is the Mindset Go Radio Show. We'll be back after the break. All right, welcome back to the Mindset Go Radio Show, everybody. I got to tell you, Ted, it's funny, Ted. One of the things that whenever I go work with organizations and companies, I actually make this comment. I say, it's funny, when I train and coach people on communication, I actually don't train and coach people differently based on their age. So if I'm dealing with a high school student, I'm dealing with CO, it's not any different. And I'm thinking about this conversation that if I could coach a parent to have this conversation, whether it's a middle school to high school transition, a high school beyond, or college and beyond, it would go something like this. There would be an outline with bullets. And the first thing I would talk about is expectations, but not just about grades. Think of the things that are unspoken we have about each other. I want parents to stop realizing that they need to be an authority to have authority. Put yourself on the same level of your kids. Have a discussion, make it mutual. So if I'm talking about expectations, if my 12-year-olds would say to me, well, Dad, what are your expectations of the school year? This is what I would say. I would say, well, I want to understand how you're going to manage your time. So what's your balance going to be with fun and screens and homework? And then I would ask what his expectation is, and then I would share what my expectation is. I would ask about his study habits and what he thinks are good study habits. If he's going to do any extracurricular activities, those same things would play out for there. But there's a bundle of 4, 5, 6 things that you could talk about with chores and responsibilities around the house. And I think that asking someone what their own expectations are, regardless of age, and then you sharing yours and then having it be a conversation piece, that's where I would start.
Well, it's important to have a guy like you involved in a school system. And what I mean by that is you're a coach. And if you have students that are interested in activities like playing sports, then they're going to have to make a schedule. They're going to have to know when they're picked up, when they're dropped off, when the homework is done. Because Dad is not going to drive them to practice unless the work is done first. That was the rule in my house. It's work first, party later.
Yes, yep, I agree.
Okay?
I agree.
And I was supposed to change that from party to something else The women in my life said, "Dad, don't use the word party." I said, so work first, have fun later. And I consider sports having fun. But what it gives you is a reason to have a structure.
Well, yeah, and I want you to think, as I go through this, Ted, think about for a second, if it was a boss meeting with an employee for the first time, that expectation part of the conversation would fit in naturally. If it was someone being promoted from within an organization, that expectation would fit in naturally. The next thing is goals. What are your goals? And the concept of SMART goals I've spoken about on the show before, but what I want to mention is, how can you expect someone to strive and achieve if the only way they're doing it is to meet your needs and to meet your goals, and they don't know how to set the goals and expectations for themselves? It's a fail. And so I say to parents or leaders, have your team, have your kids create their own goals. But they have to be SMART goals, because kids, and Ted, think about this for a moment. What happens is, if kids don't set SMART goals, and for those of you listening who don't know the acronym SMART goals, we're talking about specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. So I'm going to give you two options. Your child says to you, my goal is to do better in school this year. Now let's play that out. The problem, it's a twofold problem with a goal like that. Number one, because your child actually could end up doing better, but not as much of an improvement as you want, or not as much of an improvement as they want. So when kids beat themselves up internally in that internal voice and they tell themselves, I'm not good enough, by not setting a specific and measurable thing, they could get away with it, right?
Oh, yeah.
So the SMART goal piece is important. Now, if it's, I want to do better in school this year, instead of averaging 2 C's each semester, I'd like to only average 1 C, well, that's measurable, right? So having the conversation peer-to-peer of what are your own goals, and by the way, for leaders and parents, what is a critical step in this conversation about goal setting is you personally share how you set your own goals and what thought process you go through, what critical thinking step you go through, because then you can model that behavior for them, and then they're going to know how to come to those conclusions. And then the last piece is, and this is honestly, Ted, this is probably my biggest pet peeve about goals, which has to be a part of these conversations, is the roadmap to get there. I can sit there, Ted, and tell you I want to lose 15 pounds in the next month, but if I haven't mapped out a plan or have some accountability, it's not going to happen.
Right.
And
the word is accountability.
Well, and you know what, Ted, which just absolutely wears me out? When I think about life skills, okay, that we all need, I think about studying. I think about taking notes. I think about goal development. I think about developing plans. We're not taught those things in school.
No.
So where do you learn it?
Well, if it's not at the kitchen table after school, then it's going to be missing, and you're going to need to develop it at college. And often kids, that's why a lot of kids, they say that, the freshman 20, a lot of kids like...
Wait, I thought it used to be the freshman 15. Since when did it go up to 20? Up in there.
I had girls, so... there you go. I'll get paid for that.
You will.
Later.
You will.
But people become exasperated because they don't know what to do, and they haven't either been told or they haven't been led to a place where they can process, read, and understand what their expectations should be. So they start eating or they start partying because it's too much trouble to figure it all out.
Well, and frankly, Ted, I mean, I hear executives say to me all the time, their frustrations with mid-managers or employees is they don't do what I ask them to do. I have to tell them the same thing over and over again. They don't listen, right? They don't even have a method of listening. And I'm thinking, geez, wait, where have I heard these kind of complaints before, right?
Yeah.
It's no mystery.
Right.
And Ted, here's the thing about being, and you alluded to before, I thought it was brilliant when you talked about that the monetary incentivizing. The fact of the matter is, whether you're a parent or whether you're a teacher, you are really a CEO. You're a CEO of your family. You're a CEO of your classroom.
That's right.
And you said it. You can't treat people the same way. Everybody's motivated differently.
You just hit on something that I used to use as an opening when I would do consulting. I'd say that the reason families fail is the same reason businesses fail. It's called absentee management. You can blame the finances. You can blame poor prior planning. But unless the manager is there to adjust every day and not just direct the employees or the family members, but to encourage them to direct management. Don't wait for me to tell you. You tell me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm getting a little high.
No, I love the fire. And Ted, you know, the point I would make too there is there's a tendency when people are disappointing us and when people aren't meeting our expectations, there's a tendency to go, oh, geez, you know, I wish this person would do blank. And I'm really frustrated that this person would do blank. It always takes two to tango.
Yeah, but isn't it better to turn around to the person and say, I thought you told me you were going to do blank?
Is it better? Yes. But
that way you're not telling them what you think. You're
totally
telling them what they told you that they think.
Well, and I like the fact that I agree with that. And I like the fact that when it's I thought you told me, where it leaves some openness in the discussion.
Right.
So I like
it's
that.
It's like the few places in life where you don't want to use closed-ended.
So the bottom line is before we head into our next break, here's what you're thinking about. Leaders, parents, and I just got to tell everybody, this is why I make the Mindset Go radio show about communication challenges at work, at home, in school, because they all overlap.
Yes, they do.
Right? And so think of what I just said to summarize this discussion. Talk about expectations in the different areas. Talk about goals. Talk about the roadmap to meet those goals. Talk about the commitments each side's going to make. Talk about the fears and obstacles that are going to get in the way. That conversation applies at any level, in any place. And that's good, confident, effective communication right there. So as we go into break, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the difficulties in corporate America, the transitions that need to be made, and how you can more effectively cope with those. This is Mark Altman for the Mindset Go radio show. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Mindset Go radio show. And I want to start off this next segment before we talk about coping with work transitions. I want to bring up the concept of mindfulness that I talk about on the show off and on. And I want everybody to understand that when it comes to doing things differently, going through transitions, making changes, being motivated, it all starts and ends with mindfulness. And I'm just asking you, as you're sitting at your desk, in your car, in your home, wherever you are listening to this show, I want you to ask yourself a question. Are you mindful of what you want to change, and are you able to catch yourself in the act? And if you can't answer yes to either of those questions, you're not using the best tool available to you, which is mindfulness.
That is so important. I tried to find other words. I know you and I talked about this. We did. I tried to find other words for mindfulness because it's just, for me, it's just, I've heard it so much that it's getting to me, And I tried to create an example in my head that I could share with somebody to get them to at least broach the idea in their head. And I came up with a perfect one. I
can't wait to hear this.
Road rage. When you're standing there or sitting behind the wheel and some bizarro does something bizarre, are you mindful enough to laugh and say, okay, well, he didn't hit me? Or are you enraged and now I'm going to get even? Mindfulness allows you to take control over your emotions with your mind.
Have mind control over your emotions, huh?
And think before you speak, for instance.
Well, I agree, Ted, and I'm going to take it in I agree with you. I'm going to take it in a different spin, though, because what I'm talking about is, and I'll give you an example. Whenever I listen to myself back when I do a training or a radio show or something, I have this awful tendency where I keep referring to people as you guys. And it drives me nuts.
Yeah.
Because it sounds so slang.
And we feel we're more eloquent than that.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
I get it. I got that. I have to listen to my voice a lot.
Right? So in my mind, if I know that drives me crazy, yet I keep doing the same habit and I'm not really changing it, an example of mindfulness would be thinking, like you said, Ted, thinking before you speak. And if you were about to say you guys, or even if after you say it, but then go, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. And so I just think we demand and want so much change all the time from people. We're surrounded by transition and upheaval all the time. But we don't necessarily do a good job giving people the tools to deal with it.
What's even worse with the advent of this technology where every concept is paired with an image. People are not able to just take information. They're looking for some image to associate with it in order to process it. I was taught to close my eyes and visualize. I don't think they teach people that anymore because if it isn't on the phone, it isn't real. Okay? There's an experiment going on in social media by a few wiseacres that are usually my age, and they send out a message and say, I'm typing this message and I'm not going to put a picture with it, and I want to see how many people read it. And they're not getting any responses because without an image, a visual stimulation, people are, and listen, I'm showing my age, they're incapable.
Well, no, that you're not showing.
They're incapable of processing.
That's not an age thing. As a matter of fact, to take that one step further, before I came on the show today, I did a social media post and about what the show is going to be about today. And at the last second, I'm like, what am I doing? I've got to include a picture. No one's even going to see this if I don't include a picture. And Ted, final thought on mindfulness before we talk about transitions is, I saw this slide the other day and it said mindful or mindful. And I was like, that sums it up right there. And a lot of people who struggle to achieve and find motivation and be successful, it's because they don't give themselves time to empty their mind and be clear and gain that clarity so they know what they want and how to get it.
Let me challenge you.
Okay?
How can you be mindful if you don't first visualize the circumstance within yourself? How can you be mindful if you're not looking in at yourself as you examine these things?
Well, you can't, but I think in addition to that, it's not just looking inward, it's really also identifying what it would be different. Like it's knowing where you are presently, but you also have to visualize if I was able to make this change or transition or adjust, what would it look like then? I think it's a dual visual you need.
All right. I want to challenge you again, though, because I've been married 39 years. And
God bless you.
Thank you, God. And when I was young, I thought by now my wife and I would be the same person. But that's not the case at all.
Well, why did you think that?
Because I thought mindfulness would be for two. And that's why I'm challenging you and saying, how can you be a mindful person until you look in at yourself while you're examining something?
Oh, well okay, so I see, I misunderstood what you said. So mindfulness starts with looking inward.
Absolutely.
No question about it.
And kids are not taught to visualize. They're taught in our society to find an associated concept or visual item that you can pair with the concept. They don't look in and say, what have I got in my experience that'll help me with this?
Yeah, but you know what, Ted? I got to be honest. I'm sick and tired of hearing that reference related to kids Because what it comes down to is you're not wrong.
No,
You're not wrong.
I know some 40-year-olds.
Right. So here's the issue. The issue is, kids are not taught. But the bigger issue, everybody needs instant gratification, and no one has the time. So to sit there and say, you need to visualize. Well, most adults aren't doing it, because for you to sit. I mean, Ted, for the first time in my office this morning, and I'm telling you, I've maybe haven't done this in 2 years. I was feeling a little distracted. Like, I knew I needed to do some work. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I was really feeling anxious about it, truthfully.
Yeah.
And so I was sitting and I was getting irritated because I was feeling so unclear. I literally went in my conference room, sat there for 3 minutes, just stared out the window. Just three. And I was able to gain some clarity just because I took 3 minutes, and I was able to go and not only do my work, but I was able to start a project I'd been putting off for a really long time. And so when you talk about, I love the fact that you're talking about visualization, because looking inward, understanding yourself, knowing yourself, visualizing what and who you want to be. As a matter of fact, I love when parents ask kids, so what do you want to do when you grow up? You know what I tell them to say? Stop asking that and say, who do you want to be when you grow up? Yeah. What are those values? What are the characteristics and qualities? That's what they should be asking.
Yeah.
So I'm with you, Ted, but I hate pigeonholing millennials or kids or whatever.
Sure,
because everybody is equally offending on this.
Like I said, I know some 45-year-olds that are still children. And, I refer to them as kids. It was a bad choice of words. You're absolutely right, because there are 80-year-olds out there that have this issue and are not able to reach a point of mindfulness because it's instantaneous. They want that gratification now.
Well, and here's an interaction I had with a company yesterday. This was the interaction. Call me up, and they said, Mark, we'd like for you to come do some leadership emotional intelligence training. These were the HR people. So I said, great, love to come in. And how many people would I be training? They said 10 to 12. And I said, this is the first question I always ask Ted. Do they think they need the training? Right? And the woman said, well, they see it as valuable, but they don't really think they have time, and they think their other responsibilities are more important for them to carry out. And then in the next breath, they have a retention issue, an employee retention issue.
Yes.
The next breath, they're having a company culture issue. And I'm saying, and it goes back to what you said, I can be the greatest trainer in the world. You can bring me in to solve problems. But if the people I'm working with don't have the ability to look inward, don't have the self-awareness to understand why these problems exist, it won't matter.
Yeah, a good analogy for our technological age is even a computer has to buffer occasionally.
That's great. Oh, Ted, man, that's why I love you. I never heard that before. That's beautiful stuff. So look, we're going to go into our final break, and when we come back, Ted has brought up technology in a few of the segments here. We're going to talk about how technology is one of the biggest trends. Welcome back, everybody. Good to be back for our final segment of the Mindset Go radio show. And one quick comment before I get into my final segment. I have a streak going that I take a lot of pride in, and I want to bring that up. I have actually gone now 47 consecutive years without putting mercury in the trash.
Oh, Chris.
I mean,
that's beautiful.
Can you get better than that, Ted?
No, you cannot.
47 years.
Those button batteries have been going in the right place.
You bet.
I have one friend who calls me up and he says, but they don't tell you where to put it.
Right. Well, hey, and I want to tell you something else. Speaking of streaks, I actually calculated the other day, little shout out here. I actually figured the other day I have consumed, and this could be why I have a terrible stomach, I have consumed over 2,000 jars of Trader Joe's salsa in my life.
Oh my gosh.
2,000.
That's a lot.
Isn't that crazy?
That's a lot of salsa.
So I'm just throwing that out there. So
now,
anyway.
Do you use the blue chips or the beige ones?
No, I like the beige chips.
Do you? I'm hot on those blue ones.
Yeah?
Yeah.
My oldest son likes the blue ones better.
Well,
so,
your son has very good taste.
I got to tell you, Ted, I've got all the letters, ADD, OCD. I mean, you name a letter, I have it. And I got to tell you, I was doing a virtual sales training this morning for a company, and I noticed on the left-hand corner of my screen,
Yeah.
someone had put like a little sticker of like birds, which I had never seen before. In the middle of the training, I'm like, oh my God, I have birds on the left-hand corner of the screen.
They've probably been there months.
Months. Right? And then I go, oh, look, a squirrel.
Listen, I know for a fact that there is one condition that you do not have.
Okay.
And that's BJS.
What's that?
Bad judgment syndrome.
Ah, that's a tough one. You don't have that, do you?
No. I have been able to identify it when at work and at play.
Well, that's tremendous self-awareness.
It was tough getting there. I'll tell you what, the 70s were a rough time.
Ted, how many parents, speaking of that, how many parents do you think would pay lots of money to cure bad judgment syndrome for their kids?
Yeah.
Lots, right?
Well, it's not something to cure. It's something to overcome.
Well said. So, Ted, workplace transitions. Probably the number one, and this is only based on what I read and hear, okay? Technology. And what kills me about this is I do a lot of pro bono speakings for like job seeker groups and things like that. And so I hear a lot of men and women in their 50s and 60s who are out there trying to get jobs in the job market. It's obviously a tough market for them. And they'll say, it's just that new technology. And, I just struggle to adapt to the new technology. Or people who have jobs who could lose their jobs because they can't make the transition to the new technology.
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know what upsets me more. The fact that a company would risk losing an incredibly valuable employee because they can't make the transition to technology, or the other way around, that the employee is so stubborn and resistant that they won't make the transition to technology.
You remember, you're probably too young to remember Ross Perot.
Oh, no, I remember Ross Perot.
He had an expression called the great big sucking sound.
Okay.
And I would, when I was out there doing what you're doing, I used to use that expression about institutional knowledge. That if you set up barriers for people who hold critical information to your business and say, well, you've got to go over this hurdle or you're not part of the team, you've just created the new great sucking sound. There goes your institutional knowledge. And it's still happening today.
Well, and so where does that leave us? So here are the transitions that I hear about, Ted. Technology, new work schedules, new policies and procedures, reporting to a new manager, working with new people. I mean, these are all under that change management and dealing and coping with change. And so when I think about change, when I think about having to make a transition, you talked about looking inward. And so if my transition is I now have to report to a new boss, to me, it all starts with looking inward and saying, okay, what am I actually worried about here? And then articulating what those worries are, and then actually with your new boss, actually having the conversation.
Right.
I had a company last week who wanted me to do some training on how you make the transition from peer to boss and all the different obstacles that can come with that. So one of the guys in the room who just got promoted to a leader and now has to manage his former peers, he says, well, I got to make it clear to them that, I'm their boss. I'm not their friend. I said, really? That's what you want to make clear? Because I'm not thinking you have to make that clear.
No. It's on paper, man.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. And so we're back to what are your perceptions and fears of how you think they're going to treat you and react to you, and then vice versa. And that's the conversation. You don't have to make any grand statements. And what I often feel happens is what follows the grand statement is overcompensation. So they start out their new role so intent on overcompensating to make sure they don't come off that way that they don't even manage and communicate with people the way they would normally manage.
Right. They lose their personality in it. It literally steamrolls them.
And as a matter of fact, Ted, if I was to ask you, we do emotional intelligence assessments for companies a lot. And one of the questions I ask on that assessment, you'll appreciate this, is do you change your persona in the workplace? Do you act differently in the workplace than you do in the rest of your life? What percentage of people do you think answer that question either yes or for the most part?
I got to believe less than 2% have a clue what the question is really about. But I would have to say it's certainly less than 50%, because people aren't aware, just generally.
Well, but surprisingly, it's actually greater than 50% because people don't feel like they can be themselves in the workplace, and they feel like they have to act differently.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying? And they put on a persona. So if you don't feel like you can be yourself, if you feel like you have to act, we talk about what are connectors of people, authenticity, being genuine, right? You can't be yourself. You've already got an O2 count on you for authenticity. And so I find that when it comes to relationship challenges and transitions in the workplace, whether it's peers, supervisors, new people you're managing, goes back to where we started the show today. Have that discussion about expectation, goals. And you know what, Ted? I tell you what, if I was in HR, if I had one request for either HR people or executives that hire or managers that hire, this is what I would ask. Everybody has an employee file, right? Standard, you have an employee file.
Yeah.
Here's my employee file. My employee file has 3 parts to it. 1, it has the notes from our interview. All the things that I heard that resonated, why I wanted to hire, all the concerns that I had when making the hire, to be aware of those and to adapt and adjust to those. That would be the first thing. The second thing in my employee file would be my roadmap conversation, which is that conversation the first week to discuss needs, wants, fears, goals, commitments, and all my notes from that conversation would be in that employee file. And the third would be understanding what motivates them. Learning all about their motivation, their intrinsic motivators, their extrinsic motivators, the behaviors that get them excited, the behaviors that demotivate them. Those are the 3 components to my employee file. Now, of course, you need the standard legal stuff. I'm not saying you not to have that.
Right.
But Ted, tell me, those 3 things shouldn't be part of a standard employee file.
You're talking my language, because I have to define terms before I'll get started on anything. And sometimes it's frustrating for people to work with me because of that, because I'll slow it down. And most times people want to speed it up and let's get this over with. I want to slow it down and define the terms so that there's a mutual understanding of those terms.
And that's a good takeaway for the show today, this concept of defining terms. Because whatever transition you're going through, I don't care whether you have kids shifting through schools and life, you're moving, you're getting remarried, you're getting divorced, workplace transitions that we've talked about, whatever is, just define the terms. Remove the ambiguity in communication.
Exactly.
Right? Don't visualize this big mess that doesn't actually exist. Right? Remove the ambiguity, define the terms. And
you know what you said about managers? Managers, the best managers are in service to their people. And the best way to manage a group of people is have them come to you because they want to.
Ted, I think a great final thought for the show today is, what is your favorite quality of the station's general manager, Chris Thompson? What makes him such an effective manager? Just so everybody knows, he's right behind Ted right now.
First of all, he never puts mercury in the trash.
Well, that's huge. I mean, that's a big win right there.
And he's always in service to me.
Wow.
Always.
Let's keep the show,
Now, I'm not going to burst into tears, but that's the fact.
Okay. All right. Listen, thank you everybody for joining us for another edition of the Mindset Go Radio Show. For more information on training, coaching, or consulting for yourself or your company, please contact me at 978-793-1159 or our website, mindsetgo.com. And otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful...
do those again. What's that phone number?
978-793-1159.
And the website?
MindsetGo. And
Brilliant.
Ted, thank you. Look forward to speaking with you all again next week. Have a wonderful rest of the week. This is the Mindset Go Radio Show.
Thanks, Mark.